Video title: Poor black woman pulled bleeding Korean mafia boss from crashed car. Now he won't let her leave his mansion. The $847 she'd scraped together for rent was still sitting on her kitchen counter when Zara heard the crash. Metal shrieking against asphalt. Glass exploding like 1,000 tiny screams. The sound of impact so violent it rattled her windows 3 floors up, sending her instant ramen tumbling off the hot plate. For a moment, the entire street went silent. Then the screaming started. Zara ran to her window, her heart already pounding, and looked down at the intersection below her tiny Seoul apartment. Smoke billowed from a black Mercedes that had wrapped itself around a concrete barrier, the front end completely destroyed, steam hissing from the crumpled hood. She should have looked away. Should have called emergency services and gone back to her noodles and her problems. God knew she had enough of her own. But then she saw him. A man, slumped over the steering wheel, blood streaming down his face, his white shirt already soaked crimson. His hand moved, just barely, pressing against the spider-webbed windshield like he was trying to push his way out of a nightmare. He was dying. Zara's feet were moving before her brain caught up. She flew down 3 flights of stairs in her worn slippers, her oversized t-shirt and leggings hardly appropriate for a Seoul autumn night, but she didn't care. Didn't think. Didn't stop even when the growing crowd of people stood frozen on the sidewalk, phones out, filming, but no one moving to help. The smell hit her first when she reached the car, gasoline, thick and suffocating, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. The engine was still running, ticking like a time bomb. "Get back," someone shouted in Korean. "It's going to explode." Zara ignored them. She grabbed the driver's side door handle. Locked. She ran to the passenger side, her hands shaking, and yanked. Also locked. Through the shattered window, she could see him more clearly now, a man in his early 30s, sharp features, expensive suit, and so much blood. His eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Dark eyes, almost black, unfocused, but aware enough to see her. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear over the hissing engine. The window. She had to break the window. Zara looked around frantically and spotted a piece of metal debris from the crash. She grabbed it, ignoring the way it cut into her palm, and slammed it against the passenger window. Once, twice, 3 times. The glass finally gave way, shattering inward. "I've got you," she said, even though he probably couldn't understand her English, even though her hands were bleeding now too, even though every instinct screamed at her to run before the car exploded. "I've got you." She reached through the broken window, unlocked the door from the inside, and pulled it open. The man was trapped, his seatbelt jammed, his legs pinned somehow beneath the crushed dashboard. Blood poured from a gash on his temple, another on his neck. The neck wound. Oh God, the neck wound. Zara ripped off her t-shirt without thinking, leaving her in just a sports bra, and pressed the fabric against his neck with both hands. Hot blood soaked through immediately, coating her fingers. "Stay with me," she said, her voice shaking. "Please stay with me." She had to get him out. Now. With one hand still pressed to his neck, she used the other to feel for the seatbelt release. It was stuck, jammed from the impact. She pulled harder, her muscles screaming, her cut palm burning. Nothing. The gasoline smell was getting stronger. "Come on, come on, come on." The seatbelt released. Zara nearly sobbed with relief. She grabbed him under his arms. He was heavy, solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric, and pulled. He groaned, a sound of pure agony that cut through her, but she couldn't stop. She dragged him backward, inch by inch, her slippers sliding on the gasoline-slicked pavement, her arms burning with the effort. His leg caught on something. She pulled harder, heard something tear his pants, the car, she didn't know, and suddenly they were falling backward together, his weight crashing into her as they hit the ground 5 feet from the car. Zara's head cracked against the asphalt. Stars exploded across her vision. But her hands never left his neck, still pressing her ruined t-shirt against the wound that could kill him in minutes if she let go. "I've got you," she whispered again, tasting blood, his or hers, she couldn't tell. "I've got you." The man's eyes opened again, clearer this time, and locked onto hers. Even through the pain, even through the blood and chaos, there was something in that gaze that made her breath catch. Recognition. Not of her face, but of what she was doing. What she'd risked. His hand lifted slow, shaking, and covered hers where it pressed against his neck. His lips moved. "Why?" he whispered in English, heavily accented but clear. Before she could answer, the world exploded into sirens and shouting. Paramedics swarmed them, pulling her hands away from his neck, replacing her bloody t-shirt with proper bandages, pushing her aside as they loaded him onto a stretcher. Police appeared, asking questions in rapid Korean she could barely follow. I don't speak," Zara stammered, her hands still shaking, still covered in his blood. One of the paramedics, a young woman, switched to broken English. "You save him. Very brave. Very stupid. Car could explode. Is he going to be okay?" Zara asked. The paramedic's expression was grim. "Maybe. He lose a lot of blood. But you," she looked at Zara with something like awe. "You give him chance." They loaded him into the ambulance. Through the open doors, Zara caught one last glimpse of him, unconscious now, oxygen mask over his face, blood still seeping through the bandages on his neck. Then the doors slammed shut and the ambulance screamed away into the Seoul night. A police officer wrapped a blanket around Zara's bare shoulders and guided her to sit on the curb. Someone brought her water. Someone else took photos of her injuries, the cuts on her hands, the gash on her head, the bruises already forming on her arms. The crowd had grown. Dozens of people, all staring at her. Some were still filming. Zara looked down at her hands, at the blood drying brown between her fingers, and started to shake. Not from cold. Not from shock. From the realization of what she'd just done. She'd saved a man's life. A complete stranger. And nearly died doing it. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind exhaustion, so heavy she could barely hold her head up. Her vision started to blur at the edges. Someone was talking to her, asking her questions, but the words sounded like they were coming from underwater. "I need to go home," she mumbled. "My rent money. I left my door unlocked. I need to." The world tilted sideways. The last thing Zara heard before darkness took her was a police officer shouting something in Korean, his hands catching her before she hit the pavement. The last thing she thought was, "I hope he lives." She had no idea who he was. No idea about the power he wielded, the empire he controlled, or the enemies who had just tried to kill him. No idea that the man bleeding out in that Mercedes was Kang Mi-ho, the most feared name in Seoul's underground, the crown prince of a criminal dynasty worth billions, the man even other monsters feared. No idea that by saving his life, she'd just stepped into a world where debts were paid in blood, where loyalty was currency, and where once someone like Kang Mi-ho decided you belonged to him, there was no such thing as walking away. No idea that when she woke up, everything would be different. No idea at all. But she was about to learn. Before we find out what happens when Zara wakes up, if you're already hooked by the story, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Now, let's dive deeper into who Zara really is and why a woman who could barely afford rent would risk her life for a stranger without a second thought. To understand that, we need to go back. Back to before Seoul, before the crash, before everything changed. Back to when Zara Mitchell was still living in Atlanta, Georgia, working 2 jobs to support a man who was slowly destroying her life. His name was DeAndre Collins, and for 3 years, Zara had believed he was the love of her life. She'd met him at a community college where she was studying nursing. He was charming, beautiful, and had dreams bigger than the sky, dreams of starting his own business, of making it big, of giving them both the life they deserved. All he needed was time. Time and support. Just a little help getting on his feet. Zara had worked the morning shift at a medical clinic and the night shift at a diner, sleeping 4 hours a night if she was lucky, because she believed in him. Believed in them. She paid their rent for the cramped 1-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta. She paid the utilities, the groceries, the insurance on his car because he needed reliable transportation for all those job interviews. She bought his clothes, his shoes, even the cologne he wore. "Baby, you know I'm going to pay you back when my business takes off," he'd say, pulling her close, kissing her forehead with those soft lips that made her forget how exhausted she was. "You're my foundation, my rock. I couldn't do this without you." And God help her, she believed him. Then she got pregnant. She'd found out on a Tuesday morning, staring at those 2 pink lines in the bathroom of the medical clinic where she worked, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped the test. Terror and joy crashed through her in equal measure. She was 26 years old, exhausted, barely making ends meet. They weren't ready for a baby. But when she came home that evening and told DeAndre, watching his face carefully for his reaction, he'd smiled. Actually smiled. Picked her up and spun her around their tiny living room. "We're having a baby," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "Zara, we're going to be parents." For 3 months, she let herself believe everything would be okay. She worked herself to the bone, saving every penny she could for the baby. She bought tiny onesies from thrift stores and painted the corner of their bedroom that would become a nursery a soft yellow because they'd decided to wait to find out the gender. She dreamed about their future, about being a family. She was so happy, so scared, but happy. DeAndre waited until she was 4 months along, until she'd bought a crib and baby bottles and had her first ultrasound photo pinned to the refrigerator. Then one day, she came home from her clinic shift, her feet swollen and her back aching, and he was gone. Not just gone from the apartment. Gone. The closet was empty of his clothes. His PlayStation, his sneaker collection, his cologne, all of it, vanished. Like he'd never existed. But he'd left something behind. On the kitchen counter, next to the keys to the apartment that was in her name alone, was a note. 3 sentences. That's all 3 years of her life was worth. "I can't do this. The baby thing is too much. I took what I needed to start over. Don't try to find me." Zara had stood there in the doorway, still wearing her clinic scrubs, still carrying the bag of groceries she'd stopped to buy on the way home, things for dinner, prenatal vitamins, ginger ale for her morning sickness, and read those 3 sentences over and over until the words stopped making sense. Then she'd checked her phone. Her bank account. He'd emptied it. Every cent she'd saved. Her rent money, her grocery money, the $2,400 she'd been setting aside for the baby, all of it, gone. He'd had access to her account because she'd trusted him, because she'd loved him, because she'd been a fool. Her bank account read $23.47. Zara had slid down to the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinets, and stared at nothing. She didn't cry. Couldn't cry. The shock was too profound, too complete. He'd left her. Pregnant and broke and completely alone. The eviction notice came 2 weeks later. Of course it did. How could she pay rent with $23 in her account? She begged her landlord for more time, promised she'd have the money, took on extra shifts until she was working 16-hour days, but it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. She got evicted 37 days after DeAndre disappeared. For a while, she couch surfed, staying with coworkers who took pity on her. But you can only impose on people's kindness for so long before you start to see the resentment in their eyes, before their hospitality turns cold. Eventually, she ended up sleeping in her car. A 2004 Honda Civic with a broken air conditioner and a passenger door that didn't lock. She'd park in hospital parking lots where no one would question a car staying overnight. And she'd fold herself into the back seat with a thin blanket and try to sleep despite the Georgia summer heat and the fear and the baby growing inside her that deserved so much more than this. She still worked at the clinic during the day, showing up exhausted and hollow-eyed, but she showed up. She had to. The job was all she had left. But working while homeless and pregnant was killing her. Slowly, invisibly, destroying her from the inside out. She couldn't eat right. She couldn't sleep. The stress was a living thing, grinding her down to nothing. At 5 months pregnant, she started spotting. At 5.5 months, she woke up in her car at 3 in the morning, cramping so badly she couldn't breathe, blood soaking through her pants. She drove herself to the ER, barely able to see through her tears, and by the time she stumbled through the automatic doors, she already knew. She already knew. They admitted her. Ran tests. Did an ultrasound. "I'm so sorry," the doctor had said, her voice gentle and professional and utterly devoid of the comfort Zara needed. "There's no heartbeat. Your baby is gone." Zara had lost her daughter, and yes, it was a daughter, they'd told her that too, at 24 weeks. Had delivered her, tiny and perfect and still, in a charity wardroom with fluorescent lights that hummed too loud and a nurse who held her hand because she had no one else. She'd named her Amara. It meant grace in Igbo. Her grandmother's name. They'd let her hold Amara for 15 minutes. That was all. 15 minutes to memorize her daughter's face, her tiny fingers, the curve of her ears. 15 minutes to whisper every hope and dream she'd had for her. 15 minutes to say hello and goodbye. Then they'd taken her away. Zara had been discharged 18 hours later with a bag of pamphlets about grief counseling she couldn't afford and a hospital bill for $11,000 that she'd never be able to pay. She'd sat in her car in that hospital parking lot for 6 hours, staring at nothing, feeling nothing. She'd wanted to die. For weeks after, she'd wanted to die. What was the point? She had nothing. No home, no savings, no baby, no future. DeAndre had taken everything, and then life had taken what little remained. But somewhere in the depths of that grief, in the darkest part of that pit, something else grew. Anger. White-hot, clarifying, purposeful anger. She was 26 years old. She'd survived growing up in foster care after her mother died when she was 8. She'd put herself through community college working 2 jobs. She'd built a life from nothing once before. She could do it again. She would do it again. Not for DeAndre. Not even for the memory of Amara, though her daughter's face lived behind her eyelids every time she closed her eyes. For herself. Because she was worth more than sleeping in a car. Worth more than being abandoned. Worth more than dying of heartbreak in a hospital parking lot. It took 2 years. 2 years of working every shift she could get, of living in a women's shelter, and then a tiny studio apartment in the worst part of town. 2 years of saving every penny, of going to bed hungry, of rebuilding herself piece by painful piece. And then she'd seen the job posting. An international medical staffing company was hiring nurses for positions in South Korea. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it included housing. A fresh start in a place where no one knew her, where she could walk down the street without seeing memories of DeAndre on every corner, where she could maybe, finally, breathe again. She'd applied, interviewed, and somehow, miraculously, gotten the position. 6 months ago, Zara had landed in Seoul with 2 suitcases, $3,000 in savings, and a determination to never be that broken girl in the car again. She'd found work at a small medical clinic in Itaewon, the international district. The pay was modest, but the provided housing, a tiny one-room apartment above a convenience store, was free. She'd been slowly rebuilding her life, sending money back to pay off her medical debt, trying to learn Korean from YouTube videos and broken conversations with her coworkers. She kept her head down, worked hard, didn't date, didn't make close friends, didn't let anyone get close enough to hurt her again. Seoul was supposed to be her new beginning, her clean slate. She'd thought the hardest part of her life was behind her. She'd thought she was safe. She had no idea that pulling a bleeding stranger from a crashed Mercedes would shatter that fragile safety into 1,000 pieces. No idea that the man whose life she'd saved would become both her salvation and her prison. No idea that when she woke up, she wouldn't be in a hospital. She'd be in a mansion that belonged to a man who decided she was too valuable to ever let go. When Zara opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the ceiling. It was wrong. Her apartment ceiling was water-stained, with a crack that ran from the light fixture to the window like a lightning bolt. She'd stared at that crack every morning for 6 months. This ceiling was pristine white, smooth as porcelain, with crown molding that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. The second thing she noticed was the bed. She was lying in a bed that felt like a cloud, soft, expensive sheets that whispered against her skin, a mattress that seemed to cradle her entire body. Her apartment bed was a thin futon on the floor that made her back ache. This wasn't her apartment. Zara sat up fast, too fast. Her head spun, and pain lanced through her skull where she'd hit the pavement. She pressed a hand to her temple and felt bandages. Professional bandages, not the rough gauze from the paramedics. Where was she? The room was massive, easily 3 times the size of her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one wall showed a view of Seoul that made her breath catch, the Han River glittering in the distance, the city sprawling out like something from a postcard. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and pink. How long had she been unconscious? Zara looked down at herself. Someone had changed her clothes. She was wearing silk pajamas, actual silk, smooth and cool against her skin, in a deep navy blue. Her hands were bandaged, the cuts from breaking the car window cleaned and dressed. And 4 lines ran from her left arm to a bag hanging from a medical stand beside the bed. Someone had been taking care of her. Panic started to claw up her throat. Where was she? Who had brought her here? Why wasn't she in a hospital? Zara ripped the 4 out of her arm. She'd done it enough times to patients to know how, and swung her legs out of the bed. Her feet touched heated marble floors. Of course. Heated marble. She stood on shaky legs and took in the rest of the room. A dresser that looked like an antique. A door that probably led to a bathroom. And another door, the exit. Zara crossed to it on unsteady feet and tried the handle. Locked. She tried again, pulling harder. Nothing. The door wouldn't budge. No, she whispered, her heart starting to race. No, no, no. She pounded on the door with her bandaged fists. Hello? Hello, can someone hear me? I need to get out. Please, I need. The door opened. Zara stumbled backward as a woman entered, petite, middle-aged, wearing what looked like a uniform. She said something in rapid Korean, her expression concerned, reaching out as if to steady Zara. I don't understand, Zara said, her voice shaking. Please, where am I? Why is the door locked? I need to leave. The woman's face cleared with understanding. English. Her accent was thick, but the words were clear. You're safe. You're in Mr. King's home. Kong? I don't know anyone named Kong. I need to go home. My apartment, my job. Mr. Kong say you must rest. Doctors say you have concussion. You need care. I'm a nurse. I can take care of myself. Please, just let me leave. The woman shook her head, firm but not unkind. Mr. Kong say you must stay. The way she said it, like it was a fact, immutable as gravity, made ice slide down Zara's spine. He can't keep me here, Zara said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. That's kidnapping. That's illegal. I don't care who this Mr. Kang is, he can't just. You saved his life. The voice came from the doorway, and it stopped Zara's words in her throat. It was him. The man from the car. He stood in the doorway, very much alive, though he looked like he'd gone through hell to get there. A bandage wrapped around his neck, covering the wound she'd pressed her shirt against. More bandages on his temple. His left arm in a sling. He was wearing black silk pajamas that matched the ones they'd put her in, and despite the injuries, despite the fact that he should probably still be in a hospital bed, he stood with a presence that filled the entire room. He was taller than she'd realized. Broader. And those eyes, those dark, dark eyes that had locked onto hers while his blood soaked through her fingers, were fixed on her now with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. You saved my life, he said again, his English accented but flawless. And now you're under my protection. Zara's hands curled into fists at her sides. I don't need your protection. I need to go home. Your apartment in Itaewon? The one room above the convenience store with the broken lock and the water damage. He tilted his head slightly. That is not a home. That is barely shelter. How did he know where she lived? That's none of your business, Zara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Thank you for having someone take care of my injuries, but I need to leave. Now. No. The word was quiet. Absolute. Zara stared at him. Excuse me. You can't leave, he said, as if he were explaining something obvious to a child. It's not safe. Not safe from what? From the people who did this. He gestured to his injuries, to the bandages that marked how close he'd come to death. The car crash wasn't an accident. Someone tried to kill me last night. And because you saved me, because dozens of people filmed you pulling me from that car, those same people now know who you are. The room seemed to tilt. You're saying I'm in danger because I helped you? Yes. Then call the police. Get me protection. Don't lock me in your house like a prisoner. Something flickered in his eyes. The police cannot protect you from my enemies. Your enemies. Zara's laugh came out sharp and bitter. Who are you? What did I get myself into? He took a step into the room, and Zara found herself taking a step back. Not because he'd done anything threatening, he moved slowly, carefully, favoring his injured side. But there was something about him, about the way he carried himself even wounded, that screamed danger. My name is Kong Miho, he said. And I am the head of the Kong family. The name meant nothing to her. She shook her head. I don't know what that means. It means that I control most of the import business in Seoul. It means that I have enemies who would kill you just to hurt me. It means that the moment you pulled me from that car, you became a liability they cannot afford to ignore. Zara's mouth went dry. Import business. You mean drugs? Weapons. I mean business, he said, his tone flat. What kind is irrelevant. What matters is that you saved my life, and in doing so, you painted a target on your own back. Then this is your fault, Zara said, anger flooding through her veins, hot and clarifying. I was just trying to help. I didn't ask for any of this. No, you didn't, he agreed. But here we are. So what, you're just going to keep me locked up here forever? Not forever. Just until my enemies are dealt with. And how long will that take? He didn't answer. Zara felt her control slipping. You can't do this. You can't just kidnap someone because you think you're protecting them. I have a job. I have a life. I already spoke to your employer, Miho said calmly. I told them you're taking an extended medical leave due to the injuries you sustained rescuing an accident victim. They were very understanding. Zara's hands started shaking. With rage or fear, she couldn't tell. You had no right. I had every right. He took another step closer, and this time Zara held her ground. You saved my life. In my world, that creates a debt. A bond. I protect what's mine, and whether you like it or not, you are now under my protection. I'm not yours, Zara said through gritted teeth. I don't belong to you. For now, you do. They stared at each other across the beautiful room with its heated floors and its locked door. The setting sun painted everything in shades of amber and blood. I want to leave, Zara said quietly. I know. You can't keep me here against my will. I can, Miho said, and there was something almost regretful in his voice. And I will. Because the alternative is you dying, and I don't allow people who save my life to die on my watch. Even if they want nothing to do with you? Even then. Zara felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of this man. Would not show him any more weakness than she already had. How long, she asked. I don't know. Days? Weeks? Months? I don't know, he repeated. My people are working on identifying who ordered the hit. Once they're eliminated, you'll be safe. And if they're never eliminated? Miho's expression didn't change. Then you stay. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Zara turned away from him, walked back to the massive window, and stared out at the city below. Seoul stretched out in every direction, millions of people living their lives, free to go where they wanted, do what they wanted. And she was trapped in a gilded cage because she'd made the mistake of being a good person. She'd survived foster care. Survived DeAndre's betrayal. Survived losing Amara. Survived living in her car and rebuilding her entire life from nothing. She'd come to Seoul to be free. And now she was a prisoner. Is there anything you need? Miho asked from behind her. Anything I can provide to make you more comfortable? Zara's reflection stared back at her from the window, ghostly in the fading light. I need you to let me go. Anything but that? She closed her eyes. Then there's nothing you can give me. She heard him move, heard his footsteps crossing the marble floor. The door opened and closed softly. The lock clicked. Zara stood at the window for a long time, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, watching the city lights flicker on like 1,000 tiny stars. She'd wanted a fresh start in Seoul. She'd gotten one. Just not the kind she'd imagined. What Zara didn't know, couldn't know, standing there in that locked room, was that Kang Miho had spent the last 16 hours awake despite his doctor's orders, despite the pain in his body and the exhaustion threatening to drag him under. He'd spent those hours watching footage of her pulling him from the car. Watching her risk her life without hesitation, watching her ruin her hands breaking glass to get to him, watching her press her shirt to his neck even as the car threatened to explode around them. He'd spent those hours having his people investigate her, learning about her tiny apartment, her modest job, her quiet life. Learning that Zara Mitchell was exactly what she appeared to be, a woman trying to survive, trying to rebuild, asking for nothing from anyone. He'd spent those hours making calls, mobilizing his entire organization to find out who'd tried to kill him and why. And he'd spent those hours understanding a truth that should have terrified him but instead felt inevitable. This woman, this stranger who'd saved his life without knowing who he was, without wanting anything in return, was the first genuinely good person he'd encountered in a decade. The first person who'd looked at him and seen a human being who needed help, not a name to be feared or used. She'd given him back his life. And Miho had every intention of keeping her, whether she wanted to be kept or not. Not just to protect her, though that was true, but because in that moment when her hands had pressed against his throat, when her voice had cut through the pain telling him to stay with her, when she'd looked at him like his life mattered. For the first time since his father's death, since he'd taken over the family business, since he'd become a monster in an expensive suit, he'd felt human. And he wasn't ready to let that feeling go. 3 days passed. Zara spent them exploring her prison. The room she'd woken in was actually a suite, bedroom, bathroom, and sitting room, all decorated in soothing neutrals and expensive minimalism. The bathroom alone was larger than her entire apartment, with a soaking tub, a rainfall shower, and enough luxury toiletries to stock a department store. The door remained locked. Meals appeared 3 times a day, delivered by the same woman who'd first spoken to her, Mrs. Lim, she'd learned, the head housekeeper. The food was incredible, far better than anything Zara had eaten in months, maybe years. Korean dishes she'd never tried, international cuisine prepared by what must have been a professional chef. Mrs. Lim would enter, set down the tray, ask if Zara needed anything, and leave when Zara gave the same answer every time. "I need to leave." Mrs. Lim would smile sadly and shake her head. "Not yet. Not safe." Zara had tried to rush the door when Mrs. Lim left. Once. She'd gotten maybe 3 steps into the hallway before 2 men appeared, tall, suited, expressionless, and gently but firmly guided her back into the room. Guards. Of course there were guards. She'd tried the windows. They didn't open. Probably by design, she thought bitterly. This wasn't Miho's first time keeping someone against their will. The thought made her sick. On the 4th day, Miho came back. Zara was sitting in the window seat, her knees pulled up to her chest, watching the city wake up in the gray light of dawn. She hadn't been sleeping well. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crash, smelled the gasoline, felt the warm blood on her hands. She heard the lock click and didn't bother turning around. "Good morning," Miho said. His voice was stronger than it had been 4 days ago. She supposed even gangsters healed fast when they had unlimited resources. "Is it?" Zara asked the window. She heard him move further into the room, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. "I brought you something." Despite herself, curiosity made her turn. Miho stood in the middle of the room, no longer in pajamas. He wore black slacks and a gray button-down shirt, perfectly tailored to his frame. The bandage on his neck was smaller now, the one on his temple gone completely. His arm was out of the sling. He looked less like a man who'd nearly died and more like what he was, someone powerful and dangerous. In his hands, he held her backpack. Her worn, patched, falling apart backpack that she'd left in her apartment the night of the crash. "Your things," he said, holding it out to her. "I thought you might want them." Zara stared at it. "You went to my apartment. I had someone retrieve your belongings." Your clothes, your personal items. They're being cleaned and will be brought to you. Without my permission. Would you have given it? Zara stood up from the window seat and crossed to him, taking the backpack from his hands without touching him. She opened it. Her phone was inside, her wallet, the small photo album she'd brought with her from Atlanta, the only pictures she had of her grandmother, of herself as a child, of the life before foster care. Everything was there. She hated that she felt grateful. My phone doesn't work, she said, trying to turn it on. Dead battery. There's a charger on the desk, Miho said. But the phone is useless anyway. I've had cellular service to this wing of the house blocked. Of course he had. Zara set the backpack down on the bed and faced him. Why are you really keeping me here? I told you. For your protection. No, she shook her head. That's part of it, maybe. But there's something else. You could have given me protection without locking me up. You could have put guards on my apartment, or moved me to a safe house, or any number of things that didn't involve imprisonment. So why this? Why here? Miho was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those unreadable dark eyes. Because I owe you, he finally said. You don't owe me anything. I would have done the same for anyone. I know, he said. That's exactly why I owe you. Zara didn't understand, and her confusion must have shown on her face, because Miho continued. Do you know how many people stood on that street and watched me bleed? He asked. 37. I had my people count from the videos. 37 people stood there with their phones out, recording, and not one of them tried to help. Not one of them cared if I lived or died. They were scared, Zara said. The car could have exploded. And yet you weren't scared. Or you were, but you came anyway. He took a step closer. Why? Because you needed help. That's it? That's the only reason. What other reason would there be? Miho smiled, but it was a sad smile, the smile of someone who'd lived in darkness so long they'd forgotten what light looked like. Most people need a reason, he said quietly. A reward, a payment, recognition, something. But you pulled me from that car and asked for nothing. Expected nothing. You just saw someone dying and decided that wasn't acceptable. Zara crossed her arms over her chest. So you're keeping me prisoner because I'm a good person? That's really messed up. I'm keeping you here because you're the first genuinely good person I've met in 10 years, and I'm not ready to watch my enemies destroy you. The words hung between them, raw and honest in a way that made Zara's chest tighten. You don't even know me, she said softly. I know enough, Miho replied. I know you work at a clinic in Itaewon where you're paid barely above minimum wage, and yet you still give half your salary to something called Mercy Medical Debt Relief in the United States. I know you spend your weekends volunteering at a women's shelter teaching basic first aid. I know you send money to 3 different charities every month, even though you can barely afford your own rent. I know your landlord was about to evict you before I paid your rent for the next 6 months. Zara's blood ran cold. You investigated me. Of course I investigated you. Someone pulled me from a burning car. I needed to know who and why. And now you know. So let me go. No. The word was final. Absolute. Zara felt the anger returning, the helpless rage of someone with no control over their own life. You can't keep me here forever. I don't intend to keep you here forever, Miho said. Just until the threat is eliminated. And when will that be? Soon. You said that 4 days ago. And I'm saying it again now. They stared at each other across the beautiful room that was her prison. I hate you, Zara said quietly. Miho didn't flinch. I know. You're a criminal. You're probably responsible for ruining countless lives. Probably, he agreed. And you think keeping me locked in here makes you some kind of hero? That this is noble. No, Miho said. I don't think I'm a hero. I know exactly what I am. But I also know that I'm the only thing standing between you and a bullet in the head, so my moral failings are irrelevant. They're not irrelevant to me. Then learn to live with the contradiction, he said. Because you're not leaving until I say you can leave, and I don't plan on saying that anytime soon. He turned to go, and Zara heard herself speaking before she could stop. Wait. Miho paused at the door, looking back at her. If I'm going to be stuck here, Zara said, the words tasting like defeat, I need things. Name them. Books. I need something to read or I'm going to lose my mind. What kind of books? I don't care. Anything. Everything. Just something. Miho nodded. Done. What else? Exercise equipment. I need to move to stay in shape. I'll have a treadmill and weights brought in. And Zara hesitated, hating that she was asking him for anything, hating that she had to. Information. About what's happening. About the people who tried to kill you. I deserve to know what I'm caught up in. Miho considered this for a long moment. All right. I'll brief you every few days on the situation. Every day, Zara countered. Every other day. Fine. Miho's expression softened slightly, not a smile, but something close to it. Anything else? There were 1,000 things she wanted to say. Let me go. Take me home. Stop looking at me like that. But instead she said, when you come for these briefings, come in the evening. After 7. I'm not a morning person. Noted. He left, and the lock clicked behind him. Zara stood in the middle of the room, her backpack on the bed behind her, and tried to decide if what had just happened was a victory or a surrender. She'd gotten concessions. Books, exercise equipment, information. Small freedoms within her larger prison. But she'd also just accepted that she was staying. Had negotiated the terms of her captivity instead of fighting it. DeAndre had taken her money, her home, her baby, her dignity. And now Kong Miho had taken her freedom. Zara walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. Worn. But alive. Always alive. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived things that should have killed her. She could survive this too. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to escape. She just needed time. Information. Resources. Miho had agreed to brief her on what was happening. That meant he'd have to tell her about his enemies, his organization, his security. Every piece of information was a potential weapon. Every conversation was a chance to learn. Zara leaned against the marble sink and smiled at her reflection, cold, calculating, determined. Kong Miho thought he was protecting her. He had no idea she was already planning her escape. True to his word, Miho came that evening at 7 o'clock. And the evening after that. And the evening after that. At first, the briefings were perfunctory. Miho would enter, sit in the armchair while Zara sat on the bed or at the window, and give her updates in a clinical, detached tone. The attack was ordered by a rival family. We're still working on identifying which one. My people have eliminated 3 possible suspects. 7 remain. There was an attempt on my convoy this morning. It was dealt with. Zara listened, asked clarifying questions, tried to map out the structure of his organization in her mind. How many men did he have? Where were they stationed? How tight was his security? But somewhere around the 5th or 6th briefing, something changed. Miho arrived at 7 as always, but this time when he sat down, he looked exhausted. Not injured, his wounds were healing well, the bandage on his neck now just a small square of gauze, but tired in a way that went deeper than physical. Rough day? Zara asked, and was surprised to find she actually cared about the answer. Miho glanced at her, clearly surprised by the question. Yes. Want to talk about it? That's not what these briefings are for. I know. But we're here anyway, and you look like you could use someone to talk to. Miho was quiet for a long moment, studying her. You're offering to be my therapist? After I've kept you prisoner for a week. I'm offering basic human decency, Zara said. Even people I hate deserve that. Do you still hate me? Zara considered the question honestly. Did she? The anger was still there, simmering under the surface. But it was harder to maintain when he showed up every other evening, gave her the information she asked for, brought her books and exercise equipment and anything else she requested. I hate the situation, she finally said. I don't know if I hate you. That's progress, Miho said with the ghost of a smile. Don't get too excited. I still plan to escape the first chance I get. I know, he said. I'd be disappointed if you didn't try. That surprised a laugh out of her, short and sharp, but genuine. You want me to try to escape? I want you to be you, Miho said. And the woman who pulled me from a burning car isn't the kind of person who accepts imprisonment quietly. They fell into silence, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. My brother tried to kill me, Miho said suddenly. Zara's head snapped up. What? The car crash. We've identified who ordered it. It was my younger brother, Kang Ji-hun. Your own brother tried to murder you? Yes. The word was flat, emotionless, but Zara had worked with enough trauma patients to recognize pain being held at bay. Why? She asked quietly. Because I have something he wants. Control of the family business. Miho leaned back in the chair, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Our father died 3 years ago and left everything to me. The companies, the assets, the organization. Jihun was supposed to be my second, my right hand. But apparently being second wasn't good enough. Where is he now? In the wind. The moment the assassination failed, he disappeared. My people are looking, but he's smart. He knows how to hide. And until he's found, I'm stuck here. Yes. Zara drew her knees up to her chest, thinking. You said he wanted control of the family business. What exactly is the family business? Miho's eyes slid to her, assessing. Are you sure you want to know? I'm already stuck here because of it. I might as well know what I'm stuck here for. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, import and export. We control most of the shipping coming in and out of Seoul. Legitimate goods, mostly electronics, textiles, automotive parts. But also less legitimate goods. Items that certain people need and can acquire through legal channels. You're being vague. I'm being careful. I saved your life, Zara said. I think I've earned the truth. Miho studied her, and she could see him weighing his options, deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he said, weapons. Medical supplies that are restricted. Luxury goods that avoid tariffs. And yes, sometimes drugs, though that's not the primary business. So, you're a smuggler. I prefer logistics specialist. Despite everything, despite the situation, Zara felt her lips twitch. Of course you do. My father built this organization from nothing, Miho continued. He was an orphan, grew up in the streets, and he clawed his way up through intelligence and ruthlessness. Everything I have, everything my family has, came from his work. And when he died, he trusted me to protect it. To protect the thousands of people who depend on this organization for their livelihood. You're justifying it. I'm explaining it. There's a difference. Is there? Zara asked. People still get hurt. People still die. Yes, Miho said simply. They do. And I live with that every day. But I also keep food on the table for 5,000 families. I keep widows and orphans from starving. I provide structure and order in a world that would otherwise be chaos. The work might be dirty, but the consequences of not doing it would be worse. Zara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she believed it or if it was just another criminal justifying his crimes. But she could see that Miho believed it. That he carried the weight of those 5,000 families on his shoulders, that he bore the responsibility of his father's legacy like a crown of thorns. Your brother, she said after a moment. Does he see it the same way? No, Miho's voice went cold. Jihun sees power and money. He wants control so he can expand into territories our father explicitly avoided. Drugs, human trafficking, things that destroy communities instead of supporting them. If he takes over, everything our father built will become exactly what people think we are, monsters. And you're not monsters? We're necessary evils, Miho said. There's a difference. Zara wasn't sure she agreed, but she could see the conviction in his eyes. How long, she asked. How long do you think it will take to find him? Weeks. Maybe months. He has resources, safe houses, people loyal to him. Miho's jaw tightened. But we'll find him. And when we do, this will be over. And then I can leave? Then you can leave. The promise hung between them, and for the first time, Zara allowed herself to believe it might be true. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me the truth. Miho stood to leave, but paused at the door. Zara. It was the first time he'd used her name. Yeah. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About the situation. About keeping you here. About all of it. If you were really sorry, you'd let me go. If I really didn't care about your life, I would, he countered. But I do care. So you stay. He left, and the lock clicked behind him. Zara sat in the silence, turning over everything he'd told her. A brother who wanted him dead. An organization that supported thousands of families. A man who did terrible things, but seemed to genuinely believe he was doing them for good reasons. It would be easier if Miho was a monster. If he was cruel or sadistic or obviously evil. But he wasn't. He was complicated. Contradictory. A man who kidnapped her to protect her, who ran a criminal empire but justified it as necessary, who looked at her like she was something precious even as he kept her locked away. Zara had survived a lot of things in her life. But she was starting to worry that surviving Kang Miho might be the hardest thing she'd ever done. Not because he was cruel, but because he wasn't. And that made everything so much more dangerous. The days began to blur together. Miho came every other evening at 7 and they'd talk. At first just about the search for his brother, the security updates, the threats that came and went. But gradually, the conversations expanded. He asked about her life in Atlanta. She told him carefully, holding back the worst parts, the parts that still hurt too much to share with anyone, let alone a criminal who'd kidnapped her. But she told him about her grandmother, about the community college, about her dreams of becoming a nurse practitioner someday. He told her about his father, about growing up in a world where violence was currency and loyalty was the only thing worth dying for. About the pressure of inheriting an empire at 28, about the impossible choices he made every day. 2 weeks into her captivity, Zara realized she was looking forward to his visits. 3 weeks in, she realized she'd stopped thinking about escape. Not because she'd accepted being a prisoner, but because somewhere along the way, the locked door had started opening during the day. Mrs. Lim explained that Zara was allowed to move throughout the mansion now, to use the library and the gym and the garden, as long as she didn't try to leave the property. Mr. Kong say you need freedom to move, Mrs. Lim said, smiling. He say keeping you in one room is like caging bird. Not right. Zara had explored the mansion carefully, cataloging exits and security points, looking for weaknesses. But what she found instead was beauty. The library had floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books in Korean, English, Japanese, and Chinese. The gym had equipment she'd only ever seen in expensive hotels. The garden was a masterpiece of careful landscaping, with a koi pond and stone pathways and cherry trees that were just beginning to bloom. And everywhere, always, were the guards. Polite, professional, and absolutely immovable. For weeks into her captivity, Zara admitted to herself what she'd been avoiding. She was starting to understand Miho. Not agree with him. Not forgive him. But understand him. 5 weeks in, something shifted. Miho arrived for his evening briefing looking worse than Zara had ever seen him. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and there was blood on his sleeve. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, standing from where she'd been reading on the bed. "It's not my blood," Miho said, but his voice was strained. "What happened?" "Jihun sent a message. He killed 3 of my men and left their bodies in front of one of our warehouses." Zara's hand went to her mouth. Oh God. They were good men. Loyal men. They had families. Miho's hands curled into fists at his sides. "This is my fault. If I'd found him sooner." "This is his fault," Zara interrupted firmly. "Not yours. He's the one who ordered the hit, who killed those men. You didn't do this." Miho looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Offer comfort to someone who's keeping you prisoner." Zara didn't have a good answer for that. Didn't know when she'd stopped seeing Miho as just her captor and started seeing him as a person carrying an impossible burden. "Sit down," she said finally. "You look like you're about to fall over." Miho sat in his usual chair, and Zara surprised herself by sitting on the ottoman in front of him instead of her usual spot on the bed. Close enough to see the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Tell me about them," she said quietly. "The men who died." Miho did. Their names, their families, the years they'd worked for him. He talked until his voice went hoarse, until the words ran out, until there was nothing left but the grief of a leader who'd lost his people. When he finally stopped, Zara did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She reached out and took his hand. It was just a gesture of comfort, skin on skin, human to human. But the moment their fingers touched, something electric passed between them. Miho's eyes locked onto hers, dark and intense and full of something she couldn't name. Zara, he said, his voice rough. I know, she whispered, even though she couldn't know, what he was about to say. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, something fragile and dangerous growing in the space between them. Then Miho stood abruptly, pulling his hand away. I should go. Miho. I'll see you in 2 days. He left quickly, and the lock clicked behind him. Zara stared at the closed door, her hand still tingling where he'd touched her, her heart doing things in her chest that she absolutely could not allow. No. No. She was not developing feelings for her captor. She was not falling for the criminal who'd locked her up and stolen her freedom. She was just lonely. Just grateful for human connection after weeks of isolation. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. But that night, alone in her beautiful prison, Zara admitted the truth. She was starting to care about Kang Miho. And that was more dangerous than any assassin brother could ever be. The next day, everything changed. Zara was in the library, curled up in a window seat with a book she wasn't really reading, when the shouting started. At first, it was distant, raised voices somewhere else in the mansion, too muffled to make out words. But then came the sound that made her blood freeze. Gunshots. 3 of them, sharp and unmistakable, echoing through the massive house. Zara dropped the book and ran to the library door. Should she hide? Run? What was the protocol for a shootout in your captor's mansion? The door burst open before she could decide. It was one of the guards, the tall one who usually stood outside her suite. His name was Juno, she'd learned, and he'd always been polite, even kind. Now his face was set in grim lines, and he had a gun in his hand. Come with me, he said in Korean accented English. Now. Not safe here. What's happening? Intruders. Mr. Kang's brother. We need to get you to the safe room. Jihun had found them. Juno grabbed her arm and pulled her into the hallway. More gunshots echoed from somewhere below. Zara could hear shouting in Korean, the sound of breaking glass. They ran through corridors she'd never seen before, Juno practically dragging her along, his gun up and ready. He used his fingerprint to open a door that looked like part of the wall, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. Go, he ordered. Bottom of stairs, through the vault door. Lock yourself inside. Don't open for anyone except Mr. Kang or me. Understand? Zara nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. Juno pushed her toward the stairs, and she stumbled down them in the dark, her hands trailing along the walls. Behind her, she heard more gunshots, closer now, and Juno shouting something in Korean. Then silence. Zara reached the bottom of the stairs and found herself in a small room with a massive steel door, a vault door, like something from a bank. There was a keypad beside it, glowing softly in the darkness. She didn't know the code. No, Zara muttered, trying the handle uselessly. It didn't budge. Footsteps on the stairs behind her. Zara spun around, her back pressed against the vault door, and watched in horror as a figure descended into the dim light. Not Juno. Not Miho. A man she'd never seen before, young, maybe late 20s, with features similar enough to Miho's that she knew exactly who he was. Kang Ji-hun. He smiled when he saw her, and it was a terrible smile, all teeth and malice. So you're the woman my brother is keeping locked up, Ji-hun said in perfect English. The one who saved his life. How sweet. Zara didn't respond. There was nowhere to run, no way past him, and she had no weapons. She was trapped. Ji-hun descended the last few steps, closing the distance between them with slow, predatory grace. You know, I should thank you. If you hadn't pulled him from that car, this would already be over. But you gave him a second chance, and now here we are. What do you want? Zara managed to ask, her voice steadier than she felt. What I've always wanted. What should have been mine. Ji-hun's expression hardened. But my dear older brother won't step down, won't share, won't see reason. So I'll have to take it from him. And the best way to hurt Miho? Take away what he values most. He pulled a gun from inside his jacket and pointed it at Zara's chest. Nothing personal, Ji-hun said. But your leverage. And if he won't trade the business for your life, then you're a message. Either way, you're useful. Zara's mind raced. She'd survived too much, come too far, to die in a basement because two brothers couldn't share their criminal empire. He doesn't care about me that much, she said, trying to keep Ji-hun talking, trying to buy time for something, anything. I'm just a civilian he's protecting. I'm not worth his empire. You really believe that? Ji-hun laughed. My brother has mobilized every resource he is trying to find me. He's ignored business for weeks, let opportunities pass, all because he's been focused on keeping you safe. Either he cares about you more than he's admitting, or you're the most expensive good deed in history. Before Zara could respond, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the small room. Ji-hun swore in Korean, and Zara heard him moving, heard the click of a flashlight. But in that moment of darkness, in that split second of distraction, Zara made a choice. She'd lived through foster care, through DeAndre's betrayal, through losing Amara, through sleeping in her car and rebuilding her life from nothing. She hadn't survived all of that to die without fighting. Zara launched herself at Ji-hun in the dark, going for the gun. Her hands connected with his arm, and she grabbed it with all her strength, pushing the weapon away from her body. Ji-hun shouted, surprised, and they struggled in the darkness, both fighting for control of the gun. He was stronger than her. Trained. Dangerous. But Zara was desperate. She bit down on his hand, hard enough to draw blood, and Ji-hun screamed. His grip on the gun loosened for just a moment. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Zara felt the impact like a punch, felt herself falling backward, felt pain blooming white-hot across her left side. She'd been shot. She hit the ground hard, the concrete floor cold against her back, and distantly heard Ji-hun swearing, heard footsteps running down the stairs. The lights came back on, blinding after the darkness. And then Miho was there. Zara's vision was blurry, fading at the edges, but she saw him tackle Ji-hun, saw the two brothers crash into the wall with devastating force. She heard the sickening crack of bone against stone, heard Miho's voice, cold, furious, deadly, saying something in Korean that sounded like a death sentence. Zara. Someone was kneeling beside her. Juno, blood running down his face from a gash on his forehead, pressing his hands against her side where the bullet had hit. Stay with me, he said, echoing the words she'd said to Miho 6 weeks ago. Stay with me, help is coming. Zara tried to speak, tried to say something, but the pain was everywhere, consuming her, dragging her down into darkness. The last thing she saw was Miho, standing over his brother's unconscious form, his hands covered in blood, his face a mask of fury. The last thing she heard was his voice, breaking as he called her name. Zara. Then nothing. When Zara woke up, the first thing she felt was pain. White-hot, all-consuming pain that radiated from her left side through her entire body, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. The second thing she felt was the warmth of someone holding her hand. She forced her eyes open, a monumental effort, and found herself in a bed. Not the beautiful suite she'd been kept in, but what looked like a private hospital room. Medical equipment surrounded her, beeping steadily. And 4 ran from her arm. Bandages wrapped around her ribs, visible above the hospital gown someone had dressed her in. And beside the bed, slumped in a chair with his head resting on her bed next to their joined hands, was Miho. He was asleep, exhaustion written into every line of his body. His shirt was stained with blood, hers, probably, and he looked like he hadn't moved in hours. Zara tried to speak, but her throat was dry, the words coming out as barely a whisper. Miho. His eyes flew open immediately, all traces of sleep vanishing as he sat up straight. Zara. You're awake. How do you feel? Are you in pain? I'll get the doctor. Wait, she managed to say, tightening her grip on his hand slightly. What happened? Miho's expression flickered through a dozen emotions: relief, anger, guilt, something that looked almost like fear. You were shot. The bullet went through your side, missed all the major organs, but caused significant blood loss. You've been unconscious for 18 hours. 18 hours. Your brother, Zara said. In custody. My custody, Miho clarified, his voice going cold. He'll stand trial within the organization. He won't walk away from this. He was going to kill me. I know. Miho's hand trembled in hers. If I'd been 30 seconds later, if the power hadn't cut when it did, if you hadn't fought back. His voice broke. Zara had never heard Kong Miho sound like that. Vulnerable. Shattered. But I'm okay, she said softly. I'm alive. Because you fought, Miho said. Because you refused to die. The doctor said you bit Ji-hun hard enough to sever a tendon in his hand. You bought yourself those crucial seconds. Despite the pain, despite everything, Zara felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Good. Miho laughed, a short, sharp sound that might have been a sob. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. They sat in silence for a moment, hands still clasped together. You saved my life, Zara said. Again. You saved mine first, Miho countered. I'm just returning the favor. I think we might be even now. Not even close. Zara wanted to ask what he meant by that, but exhaustion was pulling at her, the pain medication in her fore making her drowsy. I'm tired. Sleep, Miho said immediately. I'll be here when you wake up. You don't have to. I'm not leaving, he said, and there was something fierce in his voice, something absolute. Not until you're healed. Not until you're safe. I'm not leaving you again. Zara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need him, wanted to maintain the walls she'd so carefully built. But the truth was, she did need him. Somewhere in the last 6 weeks, somewhere between the briefings and the conversations and the moment she'd held his hand, Kong Miho had become more than her captor. He'd become someone she cared about. Someone she trusted. Maybe even someone she was falling in love with. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she drifted back to sleep with his hand still warm in hers, it felt like coming home. Zara's recovery took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of physical therapy, of learning to move without tearing her stitches, of slow walks around the mansion with Miho hovering protectively nearby. 3 weeks of conversations that stretched late into the night, of laughter that surprised them both, of silences that felt comfortable instead of awkward. 3 weeks of Zara finally admitting what she'd been denying for weeks. She was in love with Kong Miho. It was a terrible, complicated, impossible love. He was a criminal. He'd kidnapped her. He lived in a world of violence and danger that she wanted nothing to do with. But he was also the man who'd stayed by her bedside for 3 days straight after she was shot, who'd carried her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk, who'd read to her when she was bored and brought her terrible coffee he'd made himself when Mrs. Lim had the day off. He was the man who looked at her like she hung the moon, who'd burned down half of Seoul searching for his brother after Ji-hun hurt her, who'd given up control of his own organization for 2 weeks because he refused to leave her side. And she loved him. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely insane. But it was real. On the 22nd day after the shooting, Miho came to her room, not the medical room anymore, but back to the beautiful suite where this had all started, carrying a manila folder. I have news, he said, sitting in his usual chair. Zara set down the book she'd been reading. Good news or bad news? That depends on your perspective. Miho opened the folder. The trial for Ji-hun concluded this morning. He's been sentenced to exile and complete severance from the family. He'll be given enough money to survive, but will never be allowed to return to Korea or conduct business in our territories again. Not execution? I argued against it, Miho said quietly. He's still my brother, despite everything. And my father wouldn't have wanted me to kill family if there was another way. Zara nodded slowly. And the threat? To me? Gone. Ji-hun's supporters have been identified and dealt with. The organization has settled under my control. There are no more factions plotting against me, no more assassins waiting in the dark. Miho paused. You're safe now. The words hung in the air between them. Safe. Free. So I can leave, Zara said. Yes. Miho's expression was carefully neutral. Your apartment is still there, paid through the end of the year. Your job is waiting for you. I've been in contact with your supervisor. Your life is ready for you to step back into. Zara should have felt relief. Joy. Freedom after almost 2 months of captivity. Instead, she felt her heart breaking. When? She asked. Whenever you want. Today. Tomorrow. Next week. Miho's voice was steady, controlled, but Zara had learned to read him well enough to hear the pain beneath. It's your choice. What do you want? Zara asked. What I want is irrelevant. Humor me. Miho was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Then he stood, crossed the room, and knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. What I want, he said softly, is for you to stay. Zara's breath caught. Not as a prisoner, Miho continued. Not because you're in danger or because I'm keeping you here against your will. But because you want to. Because somewhere in these last 2 months, you've become the most important person in my life. Because when I almost lost you, when I saw you bleeding on that floor, I realized that protecting you wasn't just about repaying a debt anymore. What was it about? Zara whispered. It was about love, Miho said, and the word hung between them like a confession. I love you, Zara Mitchell. I love your strength, your compassion, your refusal to give up even when everything is against you. I love how you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. I love how you make me want to be better than I am. Tears were streaming down Zara's face now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. I know I have no right to ask, Miho said. I know what I am, what I do, the world I live in. I know you deserve better than a criminal who kidnapped you. But I'm asking anyway. Stay with me. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Because you feel even a fraction of what I feel for you. Zara reached out and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. You're right. You have no right to ask. She saw the light in his eyes start to dim. But I'm going to say yes anyway, she continued and watched hope bloom across his face. Because I love you too. I don't know when it happened, when you stopped being my captor and started being someone I couldn't imagine living without. But somewhere along the way, you became home. Miho surged forward and kissed her. It was desperate and gentle and perfect, tasting of tears and promise and new beginnings. Zara kissed him back, pouring 2 months of denied feelings into it, every argument and every conversation and every moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Miho rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered again. I'll stay, Zara promised. But on one condition. Anything. The door to this room never locks again. I'm here because I choose to be, because I want to be. Not because you're keeping me. Done, Miho said immediately. The door stays unlocked. You're free to come and go as you please. This is your home now, but only if you want it to be. Zara kissed him again, softer this time, sealing the promise. She'd come to Seoul looking for a fresh start, for freedom, for a life that was hers alone. She'd found something else entirely. A man who'd kidnapped her to protect her. Who'd shown her a world of darkness, but treated her like light. Who'd given her a choice when he could have kept her prisoner. It wasn't the fresh start she'd planned. It was better. 6 months later, Zara stood in front of a building in Itaewon, looking up at the sign that read Second Chances Medical Clinic in Korean and English. The clinic had opened 3 weeks ago, a free medical facility for women escaping domestic violence, providing healthcare, counseling, and resources to help them rebuild their lives. Zara ran it. With Miho's financial backing, she'd created something beautiful from her own pain. A place where women like she'd been, broke, desperate, afraid, could get help without judgment, could find a path forward. The grand opening had been covered by all the major news outlets. Zara Mitchell, the American nurse who'd saved a prominent businessman's life, was now giving back to the community. It was a beautiful story. No one knew that the prominent businessman was actually a criminal kingpin. No one knew that Zara had spent 2 months as his prisoner before becoming his partner. And no one needed to know. Ready? Miho asked, coming up beside her. He'd been inside, making sure everything was perfect for the day's appointments. He'd insisted on being here for the clinic's first full week of operation, helping however he could. Ready, Zara said, taking his hand. They walked into the clinic together, and Zara felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. This was her purpose. Her second chance. She'd survived foster care. Survived DeAndre's betrayal. Survived losing Amara. Survived a bullet meant to kill her. And now she was using that survival to help others survive too. That evening, back at the mansion that had been her prison and was now her home, Zara stood in the garden watching the cherry blossoms fall like pink snow. Miho found her there as he always did, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes," Zara said, and meant it completely. She'd pulled a man from a burning car and saved his life. And in doing so, she'd saved her own. Not from death, but from the half-life she'd been living. The going through the motions. The surviving instead of thriving. Kong Miho had given her a reason to live again. Had given her purpose and love and a future that stretched out before her full of possibility. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For refusing to let me go." Miho turned her in his arms so they were face to face, his dark eyes soft with love. "Thank you for staying." They kissed in the garden, surrounded by falling blossoms and the last light of day, two broken people who'd found healing in the most unlikely place. In each other. 2 years later, Zara stood in that same garden, wearing a dress that combined Korean traditional elements with American styling, white silk with delicate embroidery, a modern cut that made her feel beautiful and powerful at once. The garden had been transformed for the wedding. White roses and cherry blossoms everywhere, guests filling the carefully arranged seats, Miho's organization members in expensive suits sitting next to Zara's colleagues from the clinic, an impossible mix of worlds united by the two people standing at the altar. Zara looked at Miho, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, and remembered. Remembered the night she'd pulled him from the crashed car, covered in blood and gasoline. Remembered waking up in this mansion as a prisoner. Remembered the slow fall into love with a man she should have hated. Remembered choosing to stay. "I take you to be my husband," Zara said when it was time for her vows, her voice clear and strong. "In sickness and in health, in weakness and in strength, through every locked door and every open one, through everything we've already survived and everything we'll face together. I take all of you, every dark corner, every light moment, everything." Miho's eyes shone with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I take you to be my wife. You saw me at my worst and gave me your best. You saved my life that night, but you've been saving it every day since. You're worth protecting, Zara. You're worth everything. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They kissed as husband and wife, and the garden erupted in applause. That night, after the reception, after all the guests had left, Zara and Miho stood once again in the spot where she'd first arrived as his prisoner. "Do you ever regret it?" Miho asked quietly. "Saving me that night?" Zara thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the anger, the danger. But also the love, the purpose, the life they'd built together. The Second Chances Clinic was expanding to 3 more locations. She'd reconnected with old friends from Atlanta, had started therapy to process her trauma, had finally, truly healed from losing Amara. She'd found a family in Miho's people, Mrs. Lim who'd become like a mother, Juno who'd taken a bullet for her, dozens of others who'd accepted her into their world. And she'd found Miho. Her partner, her love, her home. "No," Zara said, cupping his face in her hands. "I don't regret it. Not for a second. Even though I kidnapped you?" "Even though you kidnapped me," she confirmed, smiling. "Besides, you made up for it." "How?" "You gave me everything. A purpose. A family. A love I never thought I'd find." Zara kissed him softly. "You gave me my second chance." Miho pulled her close, holding her like she was precious, like she was everything. "No. You gave me mine. I was dying long before that car crash, dying inside, becoming the monster everyone thought I was. But you saw something worth saving. You gave me a reason to be better." They stood in the garden under the stars, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and created something beautiful from the wreckage. Zara had come to Seoul looking for a fresh start. She'd found so much more. She'd found love in the last place she expected. She'd found purpose in helping others find their second chances. And she'd found herself stronger, braver, more whole than she'd ever been. The door to their home stood open behind them, unlocked, an invitation rather than a barrier. Zara could leave any time she wanted. She could walk away from this life, this love, this complicated man with his dark world and his gentle heart. But she never would. Because some prisons, she'd learned, are prisons by choice. And some captors become the keys to freedom. Miho had locked her in to protect her. And in doing so, he'd set her free. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video if you loved Zara and Miho's journey from that crashed car to their wedding day. Subscribe for more Afro-Korean romance stories that will have you feeling all the feels. And comment below telling me, what was your favorite moment? Should I do a part 2 showing their life together as they expand the clinic and face new challenges? What kind of story do you want to see next? Forbidden love? Secret baby? Another mafia romance? Or maybe a revenge plot? Until next time, keep believing in second chances, the power of love to heal all wounds, and that you are always worth protecting. You are always worth saving. You are always worth choosing. See you in the next video.